Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Before we begin, subscribe and tell us what time it is and where you're listening from in the comments. Quiet dots on a shared map. Tonight we idle through a Maya market day. White Sakbe roads leading to a plaza of woven mats and shade frames. Small purchases counted in cacao beans by 20s. Bigger trades in cotton cloth and tidy bundles. Salt loaves, obsidian blade packets, incense cones, and jars of honey. Prices live in fingers and strings, not in scales. Ledgers are memory and knotted cords. We'll watch stalls open, hear gourd scoops rustle, and follow a day that runs on habit, bundles, and repeating measures until the sun folds it away again. Lower the light, slow your breathing. Let the market's rhythm set the pace. The market is still a plaza of intentions. Woven reed mats rolled tight, poles laid in pairs, shade cloth folded like quiet water. Dawn comes through the Sakbe, the white road that holds cool longer than the soil, and puts a thin brightness on the stone curb that frames the square. A woman arrives first with a basket of cacao beans. She tips them into a shallow bowl and thumbs them into 20 bean lots, little moons against gourd brown. The counting bowl has 4 dimples, worn by years of 20s. Her fingers fall into them without looking. Next comes cloth. 2 men carry a bolt of cotton, the color of unbleached milk. It's measured by spans and arm lengths, not by weight. 1 span for a sash, 2 for a child's shirt, 4 for a good trade. A cord with knots. 1 knot every span hangs from a peg on their frame. The knots tell the cloth how long it is, without a scale's opinion. When they finish lashing the shade, they set the bolt on a clean mat and roll the first arm length back so the selvage reads straight. At the plaza edge, a salt seller unpacks loaves of salt, white, brick-like prisms cast in clay molds near the coast. Each loaf wears a pressed fingertip where it was tested for dryness. He taps 1 loaf against another. The note is cheerful and dry. Prices are simple and remembered. A quarter loaf for so many beans, a full one for cloth cut to the 3rd knot. No chalkboard, no coin, only shapes that repeat. A young man arrives with a packet of obsidian blades, a small treasure from the highlands, traveling as thin, dark leaves, tied into bundles of 5 with split reed. He lays a sacrificial flake on a mat and snaps it clean with thumbnail and practice. The sound, crisp, harmless thunder, brings the knife buyers later in the morning. He sets aside a packet that shows a cloudy edge. It will cut fewer times and cost 1 bean less. Incense is stacked like a little pyramid. Copal cones, palm, amber pale, and sticky, where yesterday's heat softened them. The incense woman keeps 2 scales in her head. 1 for temple bundles, 1 for household jars. Temple bundles mean 12 cones, tied with fiber and a line of red dye. Household jars mean as many cones as fit in a gourd without pressing. She sets a strip of bark paper, hoon, under each bundle, so resin won't glue to the mat. The hoon can be written on if a long journey needs a sign, but most buyers will remember food frames the morning. A maize grinder sprinkles water into a bowl and turns nixtamal to paste. Her stone, matate, leans on pebbles to settle at the angle her shoulders favor. She pats tamal dough in quiet circles, slides it into leaves, and stacks 5s because 5s are felt easily in a soft bundle. Beside her, a boy cleans a gourd scoop that will ladle thin maize drink for travelers. He ties a little fiber loop through the gourd S neck so it can hang on the post and not wander. Prices live in hands, 2 strings, each with 5 knots, hang on the salt frame. Each knot stands for a quarter loaf sold. When the morning is done, the seller will slide the knots to the end and retie them for tomorrow. A tiny dish holds broken beans, halves and quarters, kept for making change when a packet of obsidian is worth 4.5. No one thinks this is untidy. The half-bean always finds company before noon. A runner from a nearby hamlet pauses at the plaza curb to breathe. He carries a basket of chili, tied with a grass cord and a note on hoon, not writing as much as signs. A red line for puhat, a little dot for ripe, and a cut corner that says, sell fast. He swaps the basket for cloth, measured to 2 knots, and a handful of beans counted into his palm, so they will not rattle. On his way out, he taps the stone curb, the way men check the road by touch, before trusting their feet. Stall by stall, shade frames lift and mats unroll. In the center, a quiet corner fills with tools, bone needles pinned into a rolled leaf, a spindle whorl carved with circles, a gourd of cochineal sealed with a plug so it won't creep. There is no iron scale to ring the morning alive, only bundles and spans and scores. A girl ties a reed tally to her mother S frame. 2 slits cut into the strip so a cord threads and locks. A crossed twist will record a debt when a neighbor promises to bring beans by sunset. The market S stewards, 2 elders and a younger woman with a cord at her waist, walk the plaza once before business begins. They look for what the day needs: a mat too close to the sacbe mouth, a gourd lid without its tethering string, a dog that likes salt too much. They carry nothing but memory and a small pouch of cacao beans for change in a first dispute. Disputes rarely grow. The plaza carries answers that repeat. When the sun clears the nearest roofline, shade cloth snaps once and settles. The first buyer steps from the sacbe, dust on his ankles like flour. He touches his bean purse to feel the 20 bean nests inside, 4 little pockets in leather, meant so fingers count, not eyes. He smells copal that wasn't lit yet, and chili that will go into stew. And here's a salt loaf, kiss another. The market does not begin with a shout. It begins with bundles, remembering their sizes. The day's first prices are not announced. They settle the way dust settles. By weight you feel, but don't see. A salt seller places his 2 knot strings on the frame, 10 knots each, spaced by finger, then slides the first knot to the far end. After a quarter loaf, leaves his mat. He keeps a little dish for broken cacao beans, halves, and neat quarters, shaved with a thumbnail, because salt often costs 4.5, and nobody wants to carry a whole bean's worth of salt they didn't ask for. The dish lives in a shadow where heat won't teach cocoa fat to shine. Cloth begins to move by span. The cotton bolt is unrolled 1 arm length at a time, the knot cord hanging in easy reach. A buyer places his hand to the selvage and breathes once. The seller grips the cord at the 3rd knot, lays it along the cloth, and pinches where the knot says stop. A shell sliver marks the cut, and a bone needle stitches the edge, with a few overhand bites so it won tea-fray before it learns its new job. Payment: 3/20 of cacao. Doesn't clatter. The beans pour into the counting bowl and find the 4 dimples worn there by years of 10s doubled to 20s. At the incense mat, copal cones stack into the shapes everyone expects. Temple bundles go by 12s, tied with a fiber band brushed with a line of red. House bundles fill a gourd until they stop comfortably. The woman measures by eye. and by the sound of cones settling when a buyer offers beans and asks for one cone more. She tips the gourd gently. Cones either make space or they don't. When they don't, she returns a half bean from the little dish by her knee. Fairness has a texture here, round and small, resting warm in a palm. The obsidian seller opens one packet and shows his blades to the air, the way a potter wants a jar S, curved to meet light. Edges look like water, not like metal. They are bought in bundles of 5. Food begins to answer the plaza's slow requests. Tamal bundles sit in 5s, the leaves glossy, where steam remembered them. A traveler asks for 3. The woman lifts a 5, turns the outer 2 across the middle, an old gesture for "I owe you 2," and takes a string of 5-bean knots as promise. By sunset, the traveler will bring beans. If he forgets, the string tells anyone who asks that he didn't mean to. A gourd scoop hangs by its fiber loop and ladles thin maize drink into a cup that was a gourd yesterday and is a cup today. The scoop's sound is ordinary, like water agreeing to be useful again. The market stewards pass once more, leaving almost nothing changed except the distance between 2 mats near the sackbay mouth. They move one mat by half a span to give carts a kinder turn. One steward taps a gourd lid. The drilled hole proves its tethering string is threaded and tied. Lids without strings go walking. At the salt mat, a dog learns again that dogs are not customers. A boy leads it away with 2 salted crumbs. No ledger will record. The stewards carry memory, 2 pebbles, and a small purse of beans. Disputes rarely need more. News travels without shouting. A runner from the honey stall knots a reed strip under the incense peg. 1 knot means bring a temple bundle at noon. 2 knots would have meant house bundle. 3 send gourd drink to Shade Row. The knot grammar keeps runners from wasting legs on words. A woman from the chili mat lifts a bark paper square, hoon, with a smear of red and a notch at one corner. Hot, sell quickly, and swaps it for cloth measured to 2 knots plus a half bean from the broken dish. Signs move. Everyone breathes. At the plaza's quiet edge, a counting cord hangs. 20 beans threaded by 10s. A young seller slips 1 bean down the cord every time he hears the salt tap. 2 loaves kiss when lifted. When a string reaches 2 10s, he reties a simple figure 8 knot and starts another cord. At day's end, the cords will hang. A week's story told by knots and distance, not by ink. The cords belong to the stewards, but the stalls trust them because cords cannot flatter. Weights are felt, not weighed. A calabash of dried fish costs 1 span of cloth, cut narrow, plus 5 beans for the salt it slept in. The seller scoops fish to the lip, shakes once so pieces settle, then lifts a single fish out and lays it back to show generosity is deliberate, not careless. When air thickens, he places a flat leaf over the bowl. The leaf is tied with a string pulled through a drilled hole, so it won to go, visiting other bowls when wind remembers itself. By mid-morning, the sackbay sends a little caravan, a woman with cotton thread wound on spindle whorls, a man with gourds of vinegar capped tight with bark, and tied lids, a boy whose work is to count 20s aloud under his breath. They pay the plaza steward 1 bean as sitting fee, a tiny comfort that buys a clean sweep at dusk and a place for disputes to end. The steward slides the bean into a gourd with a slit and shakes it once. The sound tells how many mats have already paid without breaking the morning's voice. Quality is corrected with calm. At the cloth frame, A buyer finds a thin place in the bolt. 2 warp threads slept through. The seller reprices it with a little knot on the counting cord and a word everyone understands. 1 bean less. The knot stays on the cord until dusk. If anyone asks tomorrow why the cord shows an odd bean, the knot answers more quickly than memory. No one argues. Cloth with a story should carry a story price. The plaza's edges do small work that keeps the center smooth. A girl runs a cochineal dab across a leaf and watches red wake up. The dye will mark temple bundles later. A man tests vinegar caps. He turns lids until they squeak and then stops. Squeak means dust will stay out. At the obsidian mat, a crack appears in a reed tie. The seller replaces it with a 2-reed twist that doesn't slacken when the sun leans on it. Repairs here are done in the same hour that noticed them. Nothing waits for a story. When the sun lifts past the first roofline, shadows tuck themselves under the shade frames. The market has a voice now. Low, padded noises. Gourd on gourd. Beans in a bowl. Cloth sighing when unrolled. Salt's light knock. The soft thump of tamal into a carrying sling. A traveler ties his bean purse by its thong. Inside, 4 little pockets each hold 20, so fingers, not eyes, can count. He buys 2 cones of copal for the road and a packet of 5 obsidian blades for later, places them into a leaf wrap, and touches the knots like someone brushing a familiar thought. Nothing here is hurried. Everything here is exact enough to repeat without fuss. The plaza is open. The knot strings are organized. The broken bean dish is within reach. Lids are tethered, cords are counting, and the day has chosen a pace it can keep. By the time shadows pull short toward the posts, the market has chosen its cruising speed. No one announces it. Hands and cords do. Along the plaza's north edge, the stewards set a shadow stick, a short stake with 2 shallow notches, so vendors can glance and know when the sun has reached the hour for midday price. Trims on wilting greens and warm honey. The stick is not authority. It is a reminder that heat has its own market rules. Cacao, which behaves like coin without looking like one, circulates in familiar grammars. Buyers carry bean purses with 4 sewn pockets that hold 20 each. Fingers find 20s, the way feet find door thresholds in the dark. Sellers keep 3 dishes: whole beans, broken change, halves and neat quarters shaved with a thumbnail, and doubtfuls, light beans that rattle when shaken. Doubtfuls are tested without insult. 1 bean is pressed gently between finger and thumbnail. If it hollows, instead of giving a cocoa smell, it joins the broken dish as change. A child at the salt mat learns to listen for the dull sound of a full bean landing in a gourd. Hard to fake, easy to trust. Prices stabilize in 20s and 5s. Obsidian blades go in bundles of 5. A packet that includes a blade with a cloudy edge costs a bean less, and the cord tie gets a small diagonal twist to show the discount was baked into the parcel, not begged at the mat. Cloth runs by spans and arm lengths measured against a knot cord. When a buyer needs less, a selvage token, a small leaf-wrapped roll of trimmed edge, is handed over as a promise of mending thread rather than change. The token can be swapped later for a length of warp yarn. No one writes this down because the cord around the seller's wrist carries a single knot for each token out, and knots are better at remembering than polite speeches. Perishables learn the plaza's cooler routes. Honey arrives in gourds, whose necks are capped with bark and tied through drilled holes so lids cannot drift. Sellers park honey near the shade row, setting gourds in shallow sand basins dampened from a jar. The sand drinks heat away slowly. Fish, dried and salted, live at the breeze mouth of the Sac Bay, where air moves even when people forget to. A flat leaf, tethered to the bowl with cord through a drilled hole, becomes a lid that cannot wander to another stall when the wind remembers its tricks. Paperwork without paper accumulates in quiet rings and strings. The steward's counting cords, 20 beans threaded by tens, sag slightly heavier near the middle. Each 20th bean pulled down gets a neat figure 8 knot before a new cord starts. At the incense mat, a reed tally, a slit strip threaded and twisted, hangs for every temple bundle taken on credit. Each tally bears a shallow notch near one end to show which household owes it. Households mark their end with a different cut. When both ends meet, the notch pair kisses, and the tally retires to a basket that buys lamp oil at weak S end. Guild habits keep edges from fraying. The cotton sellers share a span board, a flat plank with finger-wide cuts along one edge. A buyer chooses the cut with his own hand. The seller lays cloth against it and matches the measure to the knot at the cord. No arguments about whose arm is longer. The potters keep a ring test for jars. Each neck fits the same wooden ring. If a neck swelled in the firing, the ring declines politely, and the jar sells as a ladle bowl for 1 bean less. The dye sellers keep bark packets marked with 2 dots, cochineal strong, 1 dot, weaker, and a cut corner, freshly ground. Use soon. The dots are rubbed in with the same red that will color a hoon slip at the temple later. News moves by knots, more than by mouths. A runner loops a reed strip under the cloth peg and ties 2 knots. Send narrow sashes to the southern shade. At the gourd drink stall, 1 knot is tied above the peg. Someone is already bringing cups, so the same errand, one to be run twice. This above below, grammar saves legs and good tempers. Near the market mouth, a pebble tray sits with 3 sizes. When road sweepers finish a stretch of the Sac Bay, they move 1 pebble to a new dish. At dusk, pebbles say more faithfully than talk which stretch was tended. Repairs happen in the hour they are noticed. A reed shade line that stretched in damp is retwisted to a 2-reed cord. A gourd ladle, whose lip nicked on a stone, is smoothed with a shell chip. A vinegar lid is turned until it squeaks and then stops. Squeak means the cap has agreed to stay shut against dust. At the cloth frame, a thin place in the bolt earns a little knot on the seller S counting cord and a sentence the market trusts. 1 bean less. The knot remains visible until cords reset at dusk. Anyone asking tomorrow why the sums look odd can put a finger on the knot instead of someone S shoulder. Time folds itself into meal bundles. Tamal 5s become 3s and 2s by the old gesture, outer 2 folded across the middle, and the string of 5 bean knots around a buyer S wrist shows a promise that will be paid before shadows climb the posts again. The maize drink seller lifts the gourd scoop from its tether and counts to 5 breaths, while pouring so cups leave full the same way every time. 5 breaths at this stall equal 1 span of cloth at that stall, and a packet of 5 blades at the next. Equivalences that live in bodies, not ink. Security is tethered to usefulness, not to noise. The stewards walk with empty hands and a small purse of beans. A dispute about a frayed cloth edge ends with a half-bean from the broken dish, and a salvage token promised. A dog with a salt opinion is coaxed away by a boy with 2 crumbs. The boy earns a single knot on a cord the stewards keep for small favors. When 3 such knots gather, he chooses first shade at noon. Favors are counted forward, not backward. Traders from the next town arrive slow, showing cotton thread wound on spindle whorls, small jugs of vinegar with lids tied on through drilled holes, and seed gourds rattling with next season. The steward collects the 1 bean sitting fee by tipping each mat as bean into a slit gourd bank. The sound of beans tells how many mats have paid without opening the bank at all. Later, the slit will be covered with a leaf and tied. Lids and slits live tied in this plaza. By the time the shadow stick's first notch is nearly kissed, the market is fully itself. The knot cords hang in orderly tails. The broken bean dishes hold tidy quarters. Lids are tethered. Counting cords show the day's slope. Span boards, ring tests, and dot marks do their quiet work. A buyer touches his purse. 20s sleeping in their pockets. Broken change warm against the whole beans. And trades a temple bundle of 12 copal cones for a narrow span of cloth and 5 beans. The cones settle with the sound of small things agreeing. The plaza exhales. Mid-morning has measured itself. Heat gathers and flattens sounds. The shadow stick's first notch is kissed. Stewards tap the edge of 3 mats, and the plaza shifts to midday prices without ceremony. Greens wilt first, cilantro, and leafy herbs near the water jar. So the seller folds a corner of her mat and speaks a number the plaza already expects. 1 bean less. A small diagonal knot goes onto her counting cord to mark the change. When afternoon cools, the knot will be untied and slid to the tail, so today, as memory, stays visible until dusk. Honey keeps its temper in damp sand basins. The seller pours a thin line of water with a gourd whose lip has been notched to make a tame trickle, then turns each drilled and tied lid until it squeaks. Squeak means dust will stay out. 2 gourds show a little foam around the bark caps. Those move to the temple shade. Ritual buyers accept honey that traveled hard if the lid stayed honest. A hoon slip, bark paper, under those 2, gets a dot to remind the steward later why the cords show an odd bean. Salt learns the sun as a solid wood. Loaves that sat nearest the light get trimmed. The seller taps a corner with a flat shell, so a thin, translucent flake falls into a cook-s bowl. Salt sold by pinch to stalls frying maize cakes and to women who will stew beans at home. Each pinch is 1 broken bean worth. He pays himself back from the dish of quarters and halves he keeps in the shadow. 2 knot strings hang on his frame. When the cook's bowl empties, he slides a knot half the distance down 1 string. A full slide marks a quarter loaf. Halves and wholes share the cord politely. Cloth breathes under shade. The bolt is rolled tighter at noon. Too much air makes edges hunt for dust. Buyers turn to narrow uses. A span for sash ends, a half span for patching a basket rim, a selvage token for mending thread, promised later, the span board, the plank with finger-wide cuts, saves talk about whose hands are longer. The seller lays the cord to the chosen notch, pricks a shell sliver, and makes 3 small overhand bites with bone needle so an edge learns not to fray. A thin place in the cloth earns the standard sentence, 1 bean less, and a neat knot on the seller S wrist cord. At the incense mat, temple bundles rest like small pyramids. 12 cones wrapped with a fiber band stroked with red. House bundles are measured by gourd volume. Cones poured until they sit easy. If the last cone perches and argues, the seller plucks it back and returns a half bean. Change is never thrown. Beans walk from palm to palm. 2 strips of cochineal marked bark sit near the banding. 1 dot for strong, a cut corner for grind soon. Dots say enough. Noses do the rest. Obsidian stays under a folded leaf. Heat makes edges brittle. Sellers leave the bundle of 5 closed and show sharpness by thumbnail whisper on a single flake set aside for touching. A cloudy blade packet has been priced a bean less since morning. The tie bears a diagonal twist to show discount baked in. A buyer needing only 3 blades pays 4 beans and receives a reed tally with 2 slits and a twist. The tally remembers that 2 blades will be fetched later without writing anyone's name. Food stalls move from 5s to 2s and 3s. The tamal seller opens a bundle of 5, folds the outer 2 across the middle, that is, O2, and ties a 5-bean string around a wrist when a traveler promises to return by shadow. The maize drink stall counts 5 breaths per cup to keep measures equal. A second gourd hangs cooling in the shade. Its fiber loop keeps it from wandering when hands are busy. The scoop's lip got a nick on stone earlier. A shell has taken that edge smooth, so cups will not catch. Plaza housekeeping is a craft more than a job. Stewards carry empty hands. A small gourd bank with a slit for the 1-bean sitting fee, and a pouch of broken change. They adjust lanes by half a span so Sakbe mouths breathe. They retie a reed shade line into a 2-reed twist where damp stretched the morning single ply. They test vinegar lids to a squeak. They tether 2 wandering gourd caps through drilled holes. They move a dog with 2 salted crumbs and a scratch. For each small favor, a single knot is added to a cord. 3 knots let a boy choose first shade at afternoon cool. Credit lives where neighbors live. A basket weaver takes a narrow span of cloth and leaves a reed tally threaded to the seller's frame. On her side, the tally's end gets a notch that matches the seller's. Later, tally meets tally. Not person meets person. Agreement is done by wood that kisses itself. At the honey stall, a household leaves a gourd and a hoon slip with a line and a dot, half strong. And the seller ties the gourd's neck string to his frame. A tied object is a promise you can see from far away. News keeps to knots. A runner loops a reed strip below the chili peg with 1 knot. Send fresh to Shade Row. Another runner ties 2 knots above the vinegar peg. Someone already bringing lids, so hands done to repeat errands. At the pebble tray near the sack bay, 2 stones move from to do to done as sweepers finish a stretch. At evening, the stewards will weigh the day, not by speeches, but by where pebbles sleep. Animals learn markets too. A turkey wanders near the salt. The seller guides it away with a palm under its breast and a soft hiss. Dogs remember that salted crumbs live by the shade wall at noon and nowhere else. A bee tries a honey rim and finds bark. It leaves. No drama becomes a habit when lids are tied and crumbs are offered on purpose. By the time the shadow stick leans toward its second notch, the plaza is cooler, by practices not by breeze, damp sand under honey shade, retied lids squeaking shut, knot cords showing small stories, diagonal for discounts, figure 8s for counts, singles for favors. A buyer looking for 12 copal cones and a span of cloth finds both at prices the plaza could predict at dawn. Beans travel by 20s and halves. Bundles remember their sizes, and noon trims settle into the kind of order that survives the hottest hour without learning to raise its voice. Heat thins to a workable brightness, and the plaza returns to choosing rather than enduring. Prices no longer drift. They agree. Sellers recite equivalences the way fingers recite beads. 1 span of narrow cloth, 5 beans. A copal temple bundle, 12. A span plus 5. A quarter salt loaf, 4.5. 5 obsidian blades, 20. No board carries these. Mouths and cords do. At the cotton frame, the span board settles questions about hands. At the salt mat, the knot strings prevent stories from growing wider than the loaves. Credit walks on objects that tether themselves. A woman leaves her spindle whirl, a carved disc with circles, as surety for 2 spans of thread. The cotton seller threads a reed tally through its cord. 2 slits twist to lock, and hangs it under the frame. A honey buyer leaves an empty gourd with drilled neck tied to the stall as a visible promise. A hoon slip marked with a dot and a short line, strong, half, sits under it. When he returns with beans, the knot on the steward's cord moves, and the gourd goes home. The tied place remembers until then. Guild checks are quiet and regular. Potters bring 2 jars. The steward lowers the wooden ring over each neck. One passes cleanly, the other balks, and is repriced 1 bean less with a small diagonal knot on the potter's wrist cord. Dyers unwrap bark packets, 2 cochineal dots for strong, 1 dot for weaker, a cut corner for grind soon. The incense seller chooses the 2 dot for temple banding. Her fiber strip takes color quickly, then dries on a shade rope, knotted at spans so cones can be tied in 12s by feel. Food resets for afternoon travelers. The tamal seller opens a 5, folds the outer 2 across the middle, O2, and ties a 5-bean string on a boy's wrist when he asks for 3 now, 2 later. The maize drink stall keeps the gourd scoop on its tether. The pour counts 5 breaths per cup to stay same. A nick smoothed with shell in the morning keeps lips from catching. A small calabash of dried fish is sold as to the lip and 1 back, a measure everyone sees. The seller fills to the rim, shakes once, lifts a single piece out, and returns it to the bowl. The gesture means fairness is chosen, not accidental. Repairs happen in the hour they are noticed. A reed shade line slackens. 2 strands become a 2-reed twist that will remember the sun better. A gourd lid that wandered earlier is drilled and tied. It squeaks when turned shut, which is what lids should do. A cloth selvage that began to feather is stitched with 3 overhand bites. The buyer gets a selvage token, a narrow roll, for mending thread later. The token adds a single knot to the seller's wrist cord until it returns. Cords keep the plaza from needing longer words. Counting continues, even when hands are busy. At the salt frame, the cook's bowl, trimmed flakes sold by pinch, reaches empty twice. Each time the seller slides a knot halfway on 1 string. 2 halves make a quarter, 4 quarters make a loaf. At the incense mat, a reed tally hangs for each temple bundle taken on credit, notched at one end for the household sign. When a debtor pays in the cool hour, 2 notches meet like teeth, and the tally retires to the steward as basket that buys lamp oil on market as last day. Pebble trays near the sack bay shift stones from to do to schwas done as sweepers finish a stretch. Pebbles will be proof at dusk without anyone lifting a voice. Barter touches coin without arguing with it. A traveler trades a narrow span of cloth and 5 beans for a temple bundle of copal. The incense seller adds a leaf wrap so resin won't glue to cloth, then threads a thin cord through the wrap so the bundle can hang from the man S-belt. At the obsidian mat, a woman brings cotton thread wound on a whirl. She buys 3 blades, 4 beans, and receives a reed tally for 2 ode later. The tally's diagonal cut tells which mat it belongs to. A matching cut on the seller's tally end will kiss it when they meet. News remains a grammar of knots above and below. A runner ties 1 knot below the chili peg, send fresh to shade row, and 2 knots above the vinegar peg. Someone already bringing lids. At the cotton frame, a small cross knot appears on the span cord. It means the bolt has reached a thin section, and 1 bean less applies until the cross is slid to the tail. At the honey stall, a dot on hoon marks 2 gourds set aside for temple use. Dots do not need escort. Animals learn the plaza's lanes. A turkey is redirected by a palm under its breast. A dog finds salted crumbs at the shade wall and remembers where not to shop. Bees test bark caps and leave when they meet fiber lines tied through drilled holes. The market stewards move with empty hands and a small gourd bank with a slit. Beans for the 1 bean sitting fee drop with a sound that tells, without opening, how many mats have paid. The steward's cord gains a single knot when a boy guides a cart wheel off a mat edge. 3 knots earn him first place in evening shade. By late afternoon, the shadow stick leans toward its 2nd notch. The plaza grows cool by arrangements rather than by breeze. Damp sand, cooling honey gourds, lids tethered and squeaking shut span boards, settling hands, ring tests, accepting jars, dot marks, telling die strength, knot strings, spelling out halves and wholes and favors. A buyer trades 12 copal and a narrow span for salt by the quarter. A half bean returns from the broken dish and feels right in the palm. The plaza does not speed up to finish. It keeps the measure it can repeat. So tomorrow recognizes itself when morning unfolds the mats again. Late light softens to a color that forgives dust. The plaza does not hurry. It converges. Stewards coil their walking and begin to add things up without opening their mouths wider than they have all day. The sitting fee gourd bank, a calabash with a neat slit, comes first. A steward tips it just enough to count by ear. Whole beans land against the inner curve with the good dull sound. Halves make a finer tick and are pushed to one side with a fingertip through the slit, so the count 1 lie. He notes nothing on bark. Instead, he slides a single knot on a cord looped to his belt for every 10 mats that paid. When the cord reaches 3 knots and a long tail, the plaza knows the bank is fat enough for oil and sweeping. Along the north edge, the pebble tray speaks for the road sweepers. 3 dishes: to do, doing, done. The middle dish is empty now. The sweepers have finished the sac bay mouth and tapped the curb the way men greet a tool they trust. A steward moves the last stone to done, then sets the shadow stick, the short stake with 2 notches, beside the tray. Tomorrow's morning will find it without questions. Honey sellers break the sand basins and retie lids. Damp sand has drunk heat all day. Now the basins are combed flat with a twig, so no one ES foot finds a hole at dusk. Each gourd's drilled and tied cap is turned until it squeaks and then stops. 2 gourds that foamed earlier stay aside on hoon with a dot. A runner will walk them to the temple shade if asked. The seller wipes the threads with a twist of clean fiber. Honey behaves better when it sees the day closing calmly. At the salt frame, the two knot strings, halves and quarters, sharing one grammar, are reconciled. The seller slides two half slides together and tugs them once. A half plus a half equals a quarter. 4 quarters equal a loaf. He taps loaves lightly with a flat shell, returning thin flakes to the cook S bowl, so tomorrow will open with pinch salt for frying pans. The broken bean dish, halves and neat quarters, moves to the shade side of the mat where cool remembers itself first. The cotton bolt is rolled tight and tied with a 2-reed twist that 1 T slacken when night air changes its mind. The span board, the plank with finger cuts, goes under the frame. The knot cord around the seller S wrist keeps its last message visible. A little cross knot, meaning thin section, 1 bean less. He won T, untie it until morning, so that tomorrow S's story starts honest about where the bolt is weak. 2 selvage tokens, narrow rolls owed out for mending thread, are counted by touch and slid to the front of the frame so they cannot be forgotten in the cool. At the incense mat, temple 12s have thinned to 3 tidy pyramids. The banding fiber dries on a rope stretched between posts. The cochineal mark, red and simple. House bundles, by gourdful, are poured with a tilt practiced enough to stop without thought. The seller keeps a reed tally for 1 household that took a temple 12 on credit. 2 slits, a twist, and a notch that matches the family's. She hangs the tally where the evening light will touch it. A soft lantern for memory. Obsidian rests under leaf again. Edges prefer cool. The seller lays out a single test flake, not for sale, so late buyers can run a thumb pad across and hear the quiet bite. 2 packets carry the diagonal twist that marked their beanless discount at noon. He does not untie the twist until the last packet leaves, or the last light does, whichever happens first. A small shell chip sits ready to smooth a nick if the leaf wrap a S-reed tie pricks. Food settles itself into carrying shapes. Tamal bundles, once in 5s, are now 2s and 3s for travelers who want to walk out with supper warm. The familiar gesture, folding the outer 2 across the middle, makes O2 that will return before lamps are trimmed. The maize drink stall rinses the gourd scoop in a shallow bowl, hangs it by its fiber loop, and stoppers the serving gourd with a cap drilled and tied so flies can forget it exists. A small leaf lid, also tethered, keeps dust from explaining itself to cups. The steward's credit shelf gathers and returns tied promises. A spindle whorl, left for thread earlier, is given back when its owner lays 5 beans in a palm. The reed tally that locked it is untwisted and retired to the steward's basket that will at week's end purchase lamp oil. A gourd neck, tied at the honey mat, is freed when a hoon slip, dot and short line, meets the exact number of beans. Where someone needs sleep to find beans, the object stays tied, never shamed. Visible debt, not noisy debt. Around the plaza, end-of-day repairs happen the moment someone sees them. A shade line that stretched gets retwisted to a 2-reed cord. A vinegar lid takes one last turn to squeak, and then no more. A basket rim is patched with a half span of selvage, and 3 overhand bites from a bone needle. A child who lined up gourds for a game earlier now lays them on their sides under the frame so night rain, if it comes, won't turn them into drums. The stewards add a single knot to the small favors cord at their belt and tell him where to sit for first shade tomorrow. The counting cords that belong to the plaza, 20 beans threaded by tens, are straightened and faced the same way. Every 20th bean pulled down earlier wears a figure 8 knot. Now, cords with knots near the middle hang forward. Cords with few knots go behind. One steward breathes across his palm and smooths a fraying spot so the thread will not grow a story before morning. Near the Sac Bay mouth, a short lane is swept diagonal to the curb, so dust chooses the ditch instead of the mat. 2 elders tip the broom heads and tap the curb once, the day's smallest ceremony. A runner sets a reed strip under the cloth peg with 1 knot below. Send narrow sashes to the southern shade in the morning and ties 1 knot above at the vinegar peg. Someone already bringing caps, so tomorrow will not begin with duplicated legs. Lamps are not lit yet, but the plaza prepares for their logic. Sellers check oil gourds by weight rather than sight. A light gourd moves forward, a full one stays back. Wicks are pinched flat and twisted ready. The stewards count sitting fee beans by a touch inside the gourd bank, then wrap the slit with a leaf and tie it through a drilled hole so night cannot invent extra mouths. Tethered lids do half of the market's security. The other half is the habit of putting things where morning looks first. Animals take their last lessons of the day. A turkey is guided off a mat with a palm. A dog noses the salt frame and is paid 2 crumbs at the shade wall, the place where dogs are always right. Bees hover around a honey thread on a gourd neck and drift off when they find the bark cap tied tight. No chases, no shouting. Arrangements do the work. Voices would rather not. By the time the sun slides toward the second notch's shadow, the plaza has folded its sums into shapes it can sleep on. Knot strings reconciled, counting cords in their order, pebble tray finished, credit objects returned or left tied without shame, lids squeaking shut, span board stowed, ring test back on its peg, reed tallies hanging where fingers will meet them at dawn. A last buyer takes 12 copal for a span and 5 beans. Cones settle with the sound of small, round fairness. The stewards breathe once, like men who swept dust in the only direction dust understands. The plaza does not end the day. It measures it smaller until it fits under the shade frames. Tomorrow will open in the same order, mats unrolled, cords untied, bundles remembering their sizes, and beans finding their places by touch. For now, the market holds still enough that even the broken bean dish looks complete. When the sun loosens its hold on the plaza, light moves inward and work becomes counting back to 0. Sellers don't shout the end, they tie it. Shade cloths sag an inch, like a breath let out. Posts remember where the ropes bit them in the morning. Lamps belong to evening, the way lids belong to jars. Oil comes from a narrow-necked gourd. The lip is notched, so the pour agrees to be small. Wicks, twisted plant fiber, are pinched flat, then lifted into a shallow clay saucer that knows the circle of its own light. 1 saucer at the incense mat, so a buyer can see 12 copal cones settle. 1 at the cloth frame, so a selvage token isn't lost to dusk. 1 near the salt frame, to teach hands where the broken bean dish ends and the mat begins. No lamp is set where wind can make stories. A tethered bark cap waits by each gourd to stop the evening with a squeak. Counts return to their owners. The cotton seller unknots his span cord from the frame and wraps it around his wrist, so the little cross knot, thin section, 1 bean less, sits over his pulse. He won't untie it until morning, because tomorrow should wake to the truth of the cloth. He rolls the bolt tight, ties it with a 2-reed twist that holds overnight, and slides 2 selvage tokens to the front edge, debts to be paid in thread before anyone sits down tomorrow. Debts visible sleep better than debts remembered. The salt man reconciles halves and quarters with the calm of someone who trusts his own strings. 2 half-slides become a quarter. 4 quarters become a loaf. The cook's bowl receives trimmed flakes for frying pans at dawn. He pushes the broken bean dish, halves and neat quarters shaved with a thumbnail, into the safest shadow, and touches it once so his thumb remembers the count. He taps 1 loaf with a flat shell and likes the note, dry as a sound as much as a sight. At the incense mat, temple bundles have thinned to 2 small pyramids. House bundles, by gourd, leave in 2s and 3s, measured by how comfortably they sit. The banding fiber, dyed with cochineal, 2 dots for strong, dries along a rope that carries knots at spans, so her hands can tie 12s without seeing. 1 reed tally hangs for a household that took 12 on credit. The notch near its end matches the family's knife. She sets the tally where the last light tucks under it. A small promise flagged by shadow. Obsidian sleeps under leaf again. Edges prefer cool and modesty. The seller lays out a test flake, never sold, so the last buyer of the day can run a thumb pad along the edge and hear the quiet bite one last time. 2 packets carry the diagonal twist that marked their beanless discount at noon. The twist stays until the packet leaves, or the light does. A shell chip waits to smooth any nick the day invented. Fixes happen in the hour they are needed, not in stories later. Food stalls fold themselves into carrying. Tamal bundles move from 5s to 2s with the familiar gesture, outer 2 folded across the middle, which is the Plaza S written language for O2. A 5-bean string around a wrist says, "The beans will come before the lamps forget their saucers." The maize drink gourd is tilted just enough to fill 2 more cups on 5 breaths each. Then the gourd scoop is rinsed, hung by its fiber loop, and capped with a drilled and tied lid that will not wander even if the wind reconsiders. The stewards convert motion into memory. The sitting fee gourd bank, a calabash with a slit, tells its number by sound. 1 steward nudges halves apart from holes with a fingertip through the slit, then wraps the mouth with a leaf and ties through a drilled hole so night 1 to claim a share. On his belt, a cord gains a single knot for every 10 mats that paid. Another cord keeps small favors, moving a turkey, guiding a cartwheel off a mat edge. 3 knots earn first shade tomorrow. Favors are counted forward, not backward. Road talk ends as quietly as it began. The pebble tray, to do, doing, done, sits finished. The last pebble sleeps in done, and the shadow stick leans against the tray where morning hands will find it without asking. A runner ties 1 knot below the cloth peg. Send narrow sashes to the southern shade at dawn, and 1 knot above the vinegar peg. Someone already bringing caps. So duplicate legs done. To start the day, credit returns to objects. A spindle whirl, left against thread, comes home when beans click into a palm. A reed tally unwinds with a neat twist and retires to the stewards. Basket that will buy lamp oil on market as last day. A honey gourd neck unknots when a hoon slip, dot and short line meets its measure of beans. The seller turns the lid to a squeak anyway, as if to tell the night they're finished with each other. Edges are repaired so that tomorrow recognizes itself. A reed shade line slackened by damp becomes a two-reed cord that holds the knot's mind. A vinegar lid finds its squeak and stops. Lids that squeak are a plaza's favorite witnesses. A basket rim fraying by a thumb width learns 3 overhand bites from a bone needle and promises to behave. Animals learn closing as they learned opening. A dog noses the salt frame and is paid his 2 crumbs at the shade wall, the only place dogs are ever right. A turkey is redirected with a palm under its breast. Bees test a honey thread at a gourd's neck, meet the bark cap tied tight, and leave. No shouts. Arrangements do the talking, the plaza's counting chords. 20 beans threaded by tens, figure 8 knot on each 20th are straightened, so knots face the same way. Cords with more knots hang forward. Those with fewer go behind. A steward smooths a fray with the heel of his hand. Small neatness keeps tomorrow from needing explanations. The span board slides under the frame. The ring test for pots goes back on its peg. The knot strings on the salt frame sit where fingers will find them at first light. Lamps are pinched lower until each saucer shows only a coin of flame. Smoke curls but does not choose the roof. A last buyer trades a narrow span and 5 beans for 12 cones. The cones go into a leaf wrap with a thin cord threaded so they can hang from a belt. He touches the cord as if it were a thought. Somewhere beyond the Sakbe mouth, a house altar will meet the first cone with a tiny breath of resin. The market will be there folded into that breath by bundles that remembered their sizes and lids that squeaked on purpose. When the plaza empties enough that footsteps belong to individuals again, mats roll inward, poles lay in pairs, and shade cloth stacks like calm water. What counts has been counted by knots, cords, pebbles, lids, and the squeak that means enough. Night will not lock the market. Tethered things and habits, kept will. Morning knows exactly where to begin. When feet thin out and the plaza becomes mostly air, the market doesn't disappear. It moves inward. What was public turns into stored shapes that remember how morning will want them. Cloth goes first, because cloth likes clean. The bolt is rolled tight, then wrapped in a leaf sleeve that keeps night dust from explaining itself. The seller threads a thin cord through the sleeve and hangs it 1 span above the ground on a peg. Mice prefer floor stories. Pegs tell them other tales. The span board, plank with finger cuts, slides under the frame. The knot cord around his wrist still carries the cross knot. Thin section, 1 bean less. He leaves the knot for morning. Truth sleeps better when it isn't untied at night. Salt stacks on its edge, not its face. Loaves stand like little books, a finger width between each for air. The cook, S bowl, today S trimmings, sits inside an overturned basket so Dawn can find pinch salt ready for frying pans. The salt man tips his broken bean dish, halves and neat quarters, into a small gourd with a slit, shakes it once. The good dull sound, then wraps the slit with a leaf and ties through a drilled hole so night hands cannot learn numbers. He taps 1 loaf lightly with a flat shell. Dry answers like pottery, not like bread. Incense breathes into its own future. Copal cones that did not travel stack in 2 low pyramids. A leaf wrap lies beside them, with a thin cord already threaded through its corner for morning. The banding fiber, stained with 2-dot cochineal, strong, hangs on a rope until it forgets damp. The seller counts 12s in the dark by the span knots along that rope. Touching knot, then bundle. Temple promise filed under touch. The reed tally, for one household owing 12, hangs where it will catch a sliver of moon. Its notch knows who will come. Obsidian closes with modesty. Bundles of 5 blades rest under a folded leaf. Ties snugged to a 2-reed twist that will not slacken when air cools. The test flake, never sold, goes into a small gourd with a bark cap tied through a drilled hole. Lids that tie do half the night watch. A shell chip sleeps on the mat's edge. Edge already smoothed for tomorrow's nick that hasn't happened yet. Tools here are answers, waiting for questions. Honey behaves when given the right bed. Gourds sit back into their damp sand basins, combed level earlier, so the last heat of the day leaves without taking sweetness. Each drilled and tied cap is turned to a squeak, and then no more. 2 gourds that foamed earlier still rest on Hoon, with a dot. If the temple runner comes after dark, the dot will be enough. The seller wipes the threads at each neck with a twist of clean fiber. Clean threads make kinder lids. The stewards turn motion into held shapes. The sitting fee gourd bank tells its count by weight now. A steward balances it in his palm, adds a single knot to his belt cord for every 10 mats that paid, then sets the gourd into a basket lined with leaf and cord, so it won to roll a story in the night. The pebble tray, to do, doing, done, sits finished beside the shadow stick. He leans the stick against the tray, so morning hands will not ask where it sleeps. Counting cords, 20 beans threaded by 10s, figure 8 on each 20th, are straightened, so all figure 8s face left. Cords with many knots hang forward. Cords that face the same way don't argue with morning. Temple breath finds the plaza. A family walks from the Sakbe mouth with a leaf-wrapped 12, hanging from a belt by its threaded cord. They climb a few steps to a house altar. A cone meets a coal. Resin loosens curls and says the day back to itself in smoke. Salt that tapped pottery dry. Cloth that learned spans. Honey lids that squeaked. A dog persuaded by 2 crumbs at the shade wall. Lids tethered dead objects, tied where anyone could see them. The cone burns small. The house smells like arrangements instead of stories. Kitchens count without ledgers. A woman opens a tamal, 2 at the seam, and eats before the steam forgets it was water. Her 5-bean string waits on a peg until she walks it back after lamp time. A man runs a thumb across an obsidian edge, quiet bite, and peels a strip from a roasted chili. Broken beans from the market dish clack into a bowl for tomorrow's small change. A child weighs a cacao bean in the cup of his palm until he can hear the difference between good, dull, and hollow. Market habits graduate into house habits. Security is tethered rather than stacked. Gourd caps are all tied through drilled holes. Vinegar lids turned to a last squeak. The span board out of sight, but within reach. The ring test for pots back on its peg. Reed tallies, hanging where their notches can find their mates at dawn. A steward walks the perimeter, once with empty hands, stopping only to retie a reed shade line that relaxed when evening remembered damp. He adds a single knot to the small favors cord for the boy who laid gourds on their sides, so night rain, if it comes, won't drum the plaza awake. Loss is handled like weather, noticed, named, and absorbed. A seller counts 3 selvage tokens, owed out, but finds only 2 on the frame. He ties a short knot in his wrist cord and says, One thread in the morning. No scolding finds a token faster than a knot does. At the salt frame, one loaf shows a crumbling corner. It goes under the basket with the cook's bowl, becoming pinch salt for frying instead of a tale about fairness. The plaza's rules prefer conversion over complaint. Roadwork sleeps ready. Brooms lean with bristles up, so they won't learn curves. The pebble tray keeps its last stone in done. A reed screen for the Sack Bay culvert waits under a post with 2 slits cut and a cord already threaded. If night wind lifts leaves into the ditch, morning will not begin with finding tools. Tools will find morning. Visitors fold into lodging the way mats folded today. Traveling sellers stack spindle whorls in a rolled leaf that holds circles like shells. Vinegar jugs sit with tied lids against a wall that remembers cool. Seed gourds rattle once when a child touches them and then settle. The steward points them to a corner where a lamp's saucer will be allowed if the wick stays coin low. Coin low lamps make less story on plaster. The last market sound isn't a voice. It's the soft click of a duck weight in someone's memory. Here, a bean weighs the same thought, and the small squeak of a lid that decided to stay shut. The plaza goes tonight the way a knot goes to the tail of a cord. Not erased, just kept where it won't trip the next step. Somewhere, a bee that turned from bark earlier goes to sleep in a flower that didn't need helping. A dog dreams 2 crumbs at the shade wall. The plaza's shapes hold still. Bundles that remember their sizes. Cords that remember their counts. Lids that remember to squeak. Debt made visible, and the small squared shadow where the shadow stick will be waiting for first light. When the plaza has turned mostly into scent, copal thin in the air, fried maize remembered by stones, the town's council house opens its cool mouth. It is not grand, a low room with a beam that keeps rain stories out, and a bench that knows how many knees belong there. Market work folds into night ledger without ink. The stewards arrive with objects that already counted. The sitting fee gourd bank is set on a mat. A steward tips it just enough to sort, by ear, the good dull of whole beans. The light tick of halves. He does not pour. He listens and pushes halves aside with a fingertip through the slit so totals won't lie. For every 10 mats paid, he ties a single knot on a cord that hangs from a peg. 3 knots equal oil for lamp niches. 2 knots buy broom heads that won't shed before the next market. No one says approved. Knots stand in for that word. Beside the bank sits the basket of reed tallies. Slit strips threaded and twisted, each with a house notch. The steward and a temple helper match notch to notch, untwist, and retire the tallies whose beans came home in the cool. Those that didn't are strung in a visible cord by the door. Debt shown, not hunted. A spindle whorl returned from the cotton frame. A honey gourd neck string untied. A selvage token traded for mending thread. Each released object clicks the room quieter. Released things are the council house's favorite sound. Weights here are hands and habit, not metal. The counting cords from the plaza, 20 beans threaded by tens, with figure 8 knots on each 20th, hang on a wall peg. Cords with many knots face forward. Cords with few go behind. The beam above them keeps dust honest and does not explain the sums to visitors. A pebble tray sits under the cords. 3 dishes. To do, doing, done. All the stones sleep in done. The steward lays the shadow stick. Short stake with 2 notches. Beside it where morning hands will find it without talk. Temple business matches the plaza's pace. A helper lays out 12 cone bundles of copal under a leaf, rope threaded so they can hang if needed. She touches the cochineal band, 2 dots for strong, and places a hewn slip, bark paper, with a single line beside 2 bundles the temple asked for. No names. The line means taken for breath tonight. At the doorway, a family's leaf-wrapped 12 hangs from a belt. The cone will meet a coal, and smoke will repeat the market's grammar. Tethered lids, counted cords, visible promises, in the room where threads and ancestors both prefer even knots. Tribute is counted sideways through the market, not over it. A scribe in the council room keeps a string with 3 kinds of knots: round for sitting fees, long for road sweep, stretches finished, small tail for reed screens cut, and waiting by the culvert. He ties by the same measures the plaza used. Tomorrow, when the runner goes to the larger town, he will wear the string across his chest, because a string is harder to misread than a speech. Next to the string, a gourd of oil is weighed by hand and set aside for niche lamps along the sack bay. Pools of coin-low light keep ankles honest and carts kind. Night work on the road is quiet and exact. 2 sweepers carry a reed screen with 2 slits already cut, and the cord threaded to lock it at the culvert mouth. A small mallet with 1 polished face, used so often it learned a note, travels with them. They set the screen where leaves like to gather and tap until the frame decides to belong. One man leaves a pebble on the council bench, a sign that can be swept away after it is read. They will not light a beacon. The road prefers tethered lids and good bitumen seams over stories. Households close their own ledgers without numbers. A woman takes down the 5-bean string she tied at the tamal mat and walks it back, beans clicking like small decisions. A man breathes across a vinegar bark cap and turns it to a squeak. Squeak is the sound that tells dust it does not live here. A child weighs a cacao bean in a palm until he hears good dull and tucks it into the pocket that holds 20s by touch. These are market skills with a new roof, not new skills. Security wears calm shoes. The council house door is barred with a stick that fits the same way each evening. Bars that must be argued with are bad bars. The gourd bank S slit is covered with a leaf and tied through a drilled hole, so imagination cannot enter as easily as fingers. Lamps in the niches along the sack bay stay coin low. Coin low light is enough to keep a wheel from forgetting a curb, and not enough to invent attention. Loss, when it appears, gets converted rather than shouted at. A salt loaf that crumbled goes to the cook's bowl for pinch salt. The steward adds a half slide to the salt cord to mark it. A missing selvage token earns a short knot on the cotton seller's wrist. It will untie tomorrow when the thread walks back. A lid found without a tether is drilled and tied before anyone can suggest blaming the wind. The council house keeps also a tool shelf of small, agreed-upon corrections, a span board for settling cloth lengths, a ring test for jar mouths, a coil of 2-reed twist for shade lines that forget themselves at noon, a bowl of figured pebbles, 3 sizes, for assigning sweep stretches, so no one says ours was longer. The shelf is not law. It is repeatability made visible. Disputes thin to the size of the right tool. Past the door, the temple breath rises steady. A cone of copal softens and runs, saying a day's worth of modest arrangements, back to the plaza with smoke that prefers corners. Debt hung where eyes could see it, lids that squeaked on purpose, cords that kept their own grammar. bundles that remembered 12 and 5, favors tied forward. The breath does not bless more than it names. Naming is enough. When the last lamp in the council house is pinched to a thinner coin, the steward sets the counting cords flat, faces all figure eights the same direction, and leans the shadow stick against the pebble tray. He touches the knot on his belt. That means small favors. 3, first shade promised, and smiles without showing it. Outside, the sacbe keeps its pale line under stars. The market sleeps, but not as a secret. It sleeps as tethered things and remembered distances. First light rubs the white sacbe into existence, as if it had only been sleeping under dust. The plaza is a low hush, dew in the shade rope, a shy creak in a pole socket, the faint sweet left where Copel spoke last night. Nothing begins. Everything returns. The stewards arrive with empty hands, and yesterday's memory tied into cords. The shadow stick, short stake with 2 notches, goes back to its place beside the pebble tray. 3 dishes again. To do, doing, done. Stones wait patient in to do. A broomhead, newly bought from last night's knots, makes the small whisper that markets like better than speeches. The sitting fee gourd bank is unwrapped. The leaf from the slit is folded and saved. Good leaves are like good habits. The gourd is still heavy with the good dull of whole beans. Halves clink separately for broken change. The steward ties 1 single knot on his belt cord to mark the day's start. Cords that tell on themselves give mouths less to do. Stalls reassemble into the shapes that fit people. Cloth comes out of its leaf sleeve, bolt rolled tight and true. The span board, finger cuts along one edge, is set where a hand can claim its measure without starting an argument about arms. The knot cord around the cellar S wrist still carries the cross knot, thin section, 1 bean less, because truth prefers to survive the night. 2 selvage tokens, owed out for thread, sit on the frame S front edge, where morning can to pretend not to see them. Salt stands itself up like small books, with air between. The cook's bowl starts the day decently, with yesterday's thin flakes, sheltered under an overturned basket. 2 knot strings hang in reach, quarters and halves telling the same story, loose at their tails, ready to slide. The broken bean dish for 1/2 and 1/4 beans is set in shadow. Cocoa fat and sun are better acquaintances than friends. A simple shell lies at hand for trimming. Shell speaks kindly to salt. Add incense. The rope strung at spans holds a new day's banding fiber. Cochineal 2 dots strong, dried to a friendly red. Temple 12s are tied with that red. House gourds fill until cones sit comfortably. The last cone that argues with gravity becomes the half bean that visits a buyer's palm. A reed tally hangs for a household from last night. Its notch will kiss its mate when beans are ready. Tallies begin the day hanging honest, not hiding. The obsidian mat wakes quietly. Bundles of 5 do not show off. They rest under leaf. Reed ties snugged with a 2-reed twist that remembers sun. The test flake comes back out of its gourd and sits ready for thumbs to hear the quiet bite. A shell chip waits to smooth the nick that the day will inevitably invent. Equipment here is the grammar of correction. Honey returns to the plaza as calm sweetness, gourds nested back into damp sand basins that slept level all night. Each drilled and tied lid gets a measured turn until it squeaks. Squeak is consent, not fuss. 2 gourds with a dot on hoon, yesterday's foam, stay aside beneath the temple shade. Threads at each neck are wiped clean. Clean threads make kinder lids, and kinder lids make shorter days. Food arranges itself along the breathing of the square. The maize drink gourd hangs by its fiber loop, waiting for the scoop. The scoop is rinsed once, counted to 5 breaths, and hung back to drip. Tamal dough wakes under a cloth. Bundles will become 5s, then 3s, then 2s, by the old gesture. Outer 2 folded across the middle, and the 5 bean strings will begin to loop around wrists again. Small bracelets of intention. The plaza's small authorities check only what needs checking. A steward pulls a gourd lid and listens for the squeak. A seller who forgot to drill a tether yesterday finds a whole board this morning and a cord threaded. A correction made at the speed of usefulness. A reed shade line that relaxed under dew becomes a 2-reed twist with 1 long stroke and a tug that knows when to stop. The ring test visits 2 potter's jars. 1 neck sings true through the ring. 1 balks and accepts 1 bean less, with a diagonal knot on the potter S wrist. Credit sets itself out where eyes can see it. A spindle whirl hangs from the cotton frame by its cord, with a reed tally threaded. 2 slits twist. A honey gourd neck string is tied to the stall with a hoon slip marked by dot and line. A single leaf-wrapped selvage token waits for thread to be paid back. Visible debt is the plaza as politeness. It frees mouths to talk about weather and routes instead of promises. News arrives as knots, not as claims. A runner loops a reed strip under the incense peg with 2 knots, house bundles to the eastern shade, and ties 1 knot above at the vinegar peg. Someone already bringing caps. The pebble tray moves 1 stone from to do to doing. When road sweepers start toward the culvert with the reed screen whose 2 slits are already cut and cord already threaded, the sweepers tap the curb once, the plaza's smallest ceremony. First buyers step in from the sack bay with dust at ankle height. A bean purse touches a palm. Fingers count 20 by pocket, not by eye. 1 buyer trades a narrow span and 5 beans for 12 copal. The cones slide into a leaf wrap, banded red, a thin cord threaded through so they can hang from a belt and make temple breath portable. Another shifts a salt loaf and listens for pottery dry. A cook pays 4.5 for a quarter and receives the half bean from the dish of quarters with the same good dull sound a true bean makes when it lands. The plaza takes its pace without choosing it aloud. Knot strings begin to travel, counting cords, 20 beans with figure 8 on each 20th, start their first beads. Span boards touch hands. Ring tests tell truth. Tethered lids keep lids loyal. Reed tallies accept names by notch. Half beans occupy their proper corner, and no one feels cheated by their size. Even the dog remembers the rule and noses the shade wall rather than the salt frame. 2 crumbs confirm him. A bee tests a honey thread and finds bark. It leaves without needing persuasion. By mid-morning, the day will look like yesterday, on purpose. When noon leans, 1 bean less will move diagonally onto cords, and then to the tail when the air forgives. When evening returns, lamps will pinch to coins of flame, lids will squeak closed, pebbles will sleep in dun, and bundles will remember their sizes. Nothing here promises excitement. Everything here promises repeatability at human speed. Distance in this town is measured in spans, 20s, 12s, and 5s. Fairness in tethers and knots. Memory in objects more than in mouths. The market holds the night as quiet and trades it for day's usefulness without raising its voice. Tomorrow will inherit a plaza that recognizes itself, because today was careful to be the same.